Okay, so today I think we should talk about anxiety.
Oh boy.
And I'm feeling scared to talk about this.
So we brought in our professional.
Yes.
The number
Jordan.
one fear is anxiety of talking to others about anxiety.
The one and only Jordan Doty is here to talk to you about being scared.
We know Jordan has a great fear of talking.
And dogs.
He's the only person I know that can turn a small text into a book.
And he is facing one of his biggest fears right now, being in the same room as Stormy, because
Yeah.
Stormy's a dog.
Yeah, she and I are trying to get to know each other, but it's like a 10-year plan. So
You know, it doesn't help that she's like in her terrible twos right now, and she just, if you try to pet her, she just wants to bite you, and it honestly really hurts. So, yeah, you should be scared.
You don't be
be
bad
honest.
mouthing my dog.
that's a great dog right there. You need to learn to get along with the dog and the owner.
She is
because-
currently scratching her butt.
Okay, so what do you want to talk about anxiety? What's the problem here?
So I think, honestly, I believe as someone from Generation Z, I think that anxiety has increased a lot with my generation than yours.
Exactly. Yeah, about
Yeah,
100 times.
yeah. And I think it's very obvious, and I don't think that it's necessarily always valid. Like, I think a lot of times we'll feel anxious, like we'll have anxious feelings and coin the term, oh, I have anxiety. But it's more just feeling uncomfortable.
Well, it may be anxiety, but it's kind of brought on. I mean, you bring it on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So there's different kinds of anxiety, aren't there?
Yeah, I think there's two things. I mean, and we'll get into it, I'm sure. But one is if you don't have a worldview centered and trusting in Christ, that's going to increase your anxiety multiple fold, and we'll get to that. But also, I feel like our culture, whether in the school system from childhood on up, and parents have taught, almost produced anxiety in kids before they even knew what that was.
Right.
Well,
Yeah, I think we need to start probably with, when we're talking about this, I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression. Because there are some people who have anxiety disorders.
oh, for sure. I believe that
there's
definitely is
sincere
real.
Anxiety disorders. So, number one, when we're discussing this, we're not talking about somebody that's got sometimes they're brought on by medical conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're brought on by real bad traumas, that have happened. I think a lot of our soldiers have experienced when they come back from war.
PTSD.
Which is, these are anxiety disorders. So I think that'd take a whole different podcast to discuss that kind of thing. So, but what we're really focused in on, I think, is how come there's been so much increase in anxiety amongst, say, teenagers, particularly, I think, teenage girls, even though it's not just teenage girls.
Yeah, I would agree.
But I think that's more kind of what we're addressing.
And I think you could look at each generation, like from your generation to my generation to Bethany's, and say each one has seen an increase on a scale.
So
Well,
why do you think there's an increase in it?
First, like I said earlier, I really think worldview and your trust in Christ and eternal life plays a huge baseline on the start of it.
Okay. I think that's some of it, yeah.
I want to know if people in third world countries deal with anxiety like Americans do.
It probably depends on the third world country.
Because they would have like anxiety from like, am I going to eat today? But
Well, that's a
yeah,
concern.
yeah, and we have anxiety from like,
No, I don't want to miss many meals.
oh, I'm scared to take this test.
Well, yeah, but a lot of it has to do with, I think there's a lot of reasons. So let me get the one first out of the way that's, I think, maybe people will disagree with, but I think it is a big deal. And we were talking about this earlier, so I'm going to throw it out there.
Are you about to say something you probably shouldn't say?
I'm probably going to say something I shouldn't say.
That sounds appropriate for this show.
Seems appropriate. Yeah.
But like when I think it has to do with a lot of vaccines. It has to do with a lot of it. And the reason I'm saying that is like my generation, when I went through my vaccine schedule Stormy, don't eat the carpet.
Stormy's currently eating
You're
the
going to
rug.
cause Bethany
Stormy's
anxiety.
like the third.
I'm
Stormy's
like
like the
over
third
here like,
guest that's trying to eat the carpet. You
please,
gotta
this room
tamp
took
this
forever
down.
to do. Don't eat the carpet, Stormy.
Leave it. Leave it.
Oh, she's in trouble, like always.
Thank you. Okay. But,
Vaccines.
but like when I was a kid, I don't know if is kid politically correct anymore. But when I was a kid, you
I don't
had
know.
basically 5 vaccines. Okay. And those vaccines were all made from a live virus. And studies today, if you keep up with that kind of thing, show that there have been a lot of things that have increased. Autism has increased since that time. And I think another thing that we've really seen an increase in is anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, I don't have big medical studies, but there are people who do that show that just the increase. I think today it's 5 or 6 times the amount of vaccines that somebody taking. I was listening to a pediatrician last week, and he was saying that the kids who come in with that are unvaccinated are much more healthy than the kids that are.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a correlation probably between the overdoing
The vaccines.
of vaccines.
Well, and I just wonder how people before all these vaccines did it. Like, how did they live?
Well, and frankly, there were some things like when we took our 5,
Uh-huh.
but we took vaccines that y'all didn't take. One particularly, you didn't have a smallpox vaccine. We did, but smallpox was a very real problem. I went to school with kids that had polio,
Mm-hmm.
and so that had been a huge problem. So it's not like I don't think there's ever been a time for a vaccine. So I don't think you could put me in the anti-vaxxer category.
Yeah. No.
Maybe more so today than I used to be.
So what would, honestly, since we're going to go down that road, what would you tell the parent who just had a baby or has a young child and is wondering, should I vaccinate my child?
Well, with the craziness today, I'd say don't vaccinate.
I don't
Uh,
know.
but-
That's a tough subject.
And, I'm not a doctor. I don't pretend to be one. Don't play one on TV.
Yeah.
Never been a janitor for a doctor, anything
Well,
like that.
And you vaccinated your children.
I vaccinated my children,
So,
and we had we went to war over it because Sugar Lump didn't want to vaccinate the children,
and here I am.
and I overrode her.
Vaccinated.
But you have experienced some anxiety too.
I have. And I don't know, necessarily what it's from. I think to be honest, I think a lot of it stems from comfort or, not like your generation grew up just doing things. Like there wasn't any like sheltering and holding you back from things. And I think some of mine has come from living a comfortable life. I think a lot of kids today, it's comfort and it's parents being, not saying that you did this, but it's parents being cushy with them and saying, if you don't want to do that, just don't. If you're scared of it, stay away from it. It's fine.
Well, I'm not really bent toward that. I'm like, get out there and get after it.
For sure. Not saying that you're like that,
But I think one of the problems, and you can jump in here anytime. We brought you along for a reason.
You're on a roll. You're on a
But
roll.
one of the reasons that I see is that kids spend too much sitting around with this phone.
yeah,
They're not getting enough exercise.
that's comfort too.
They're not moving. They're tunneled in on this, and so it's always about, they need to get out, get good fresh air.
Yeah.
They need to move.
Well, and I'll even get like that too sometimes. Like I'll feel uncomfortable, or it's sometimes just in a social setting, or I'll start to feel like, I don't really know what to say right now. It's making me uncomfortable. So I'll just be like, okay, good, my phone's right here. It's like a vice almost.
I used to see people sitting around on the couch with you, texting one another.
Mm-hmm.
People like me sitting here texting y'all right now. Well, I can probably talk to you.
Yeah.
Some of the things
You know?
too, we live more and more in an urban culture, surrounded by man-made things, not necessarily by God-made. Not so much out here in Annaville, but where I grew up, and it's a busier schedule. It's not to say that people obviously didn't work hard back in the day, but it just seems like the more technology we have, the more we pack into our schedules and the more things we try to accomplish and take on.
Yeah.
And so then you have people that are trying to juggle a lot of different things, and you're surrounded by a bunch of fast-paced culture,
Yeah.
with a lot of man-made stuff. And you don't take that time to go take walks. You don't take that time to work outdoors. Simplify down your schedule. We're trying to keep up with the world, so
Well,
that's another issue to think about.
and I think that fast paced culture contributes a lot because for me, even like I'll stay really busy and I'll just be going, going, going. And then when I sit for 1 second, it like all piles on top of me. And it's like, oh, wow, I'm stressed now.
Isn't it amazing, though, that we talk about this fast-paced culture, right? Well, what'd they do back when you had to use a washboard down at the river to wash your clothes? Because you didn't have an automatic washer and dryer. And
It's the
and,
comfort.
and you didn't have a car. You had to hook up to a buggy and put your horse on the buggy to go get your stuff done. When you did your plowing, you didn't have a big old John Deere plow half acre at a time. You had to do it with a mule or ox. And I mean, really, what makes us so more fast paced, and why?
Well, you think about the 50s, they advertised all these household items for women in the kitchen that would save time so then you could just relax. And what we tend to do is we take that saved time that we get and we just add more to it and keep going. And I'd still also say that when you don't have a Christ worldview, you're always looking for things to take your mind off the need for God.
Always
And
talking about Christ.
keep a busy schedule.
Jeez, everything
You're
comes
trying
back
to
to
drown out
Jesus
things. One of the
around
reasons
here.
I moved to the city when I was going to college was I by then had stopped believing in God, so I was becoming an atheist. I wanted to be in an area where people were up all hours.
How'd that work out for
It
you?
didn't work so well for me.
Yeah.
But people are up all hours in the city. I was moved to
Yeah.
Austin. There's always something to do. I always had music on. I had TV on. I had things on. I'm working, not really doing much school, but drowning out the silence. I
Yeah.
couldn't sit there and be silent because if I was, I would be stuck with
Get-
myself or a
Yes.
lack of God or
And your
the
thoughts
big
would take
questions of
over.
life.
The thoughts
Yeah.
take over and they're crippling.
Does God say something about be still and know that I am God?
Yeah.
Maybe you ought to slow down and figure out who's really running things.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a big point. He's in charge of everything.
And I think that's a huge verse, be still. That is hard in our culture. And I just started doing this recently and by recently I mean like 2 days ago. So very recent. But I set a timer on my phone for 10 minutes and I just sit with the Lord because the rest of my day is going to be really insane. And I know that like, even though I can be in constant prayer, it's very difficult to just get still and just sit with God and say, hey, God, I'm going to listen. Even if he says nothing that day, I'm going to listen to what you have to tell me today.
I don't think you've done that in the last 2 weeks. I've watched you for a long time get up and grab your Bible and go out and sit on the porch.
And I was going to say, I've always grabbed my Bible, but I recently started doing where I just set the timer on my phone and I will just sit still and not even necessarily pray. I'll just sit and like see if God has anything to tell me today. Just sit with the Lord. And it is hard to keep my mind still because my mind starts to go every other direction, thinking about all the things I have to do in the day.
You know what I find helpful, honestly? And I'm pretty laid back. But sometimes I like to go for a prayer walk, and rather than talk, I like to listen.
Yeah.
Is God trying to tell me something? So sometimes, and I've even had God when I was out walking and praying, that God would tell me, why don't you be quiet?
Yeah. Me too.
Well, and that's like relationships. There are times when you're meeting somebody new that you feel like you have to talk and there's an uncomfortable silence. The more you get to know a friend, a spouse, loved one, and especially God, the more you can learn to sit in silence with them and have a relationship without having to say or do something.
Yeah.
Unless it's required.
Yeah.
And that's a big part. One thing that helped me a lot, well, number one, coming to Christ was at age 25 was huge for me. I was now able to enjoy the silence because I was now right with God because of Jesus. I had a peace I didn't have before. And big deal is I had eternal life, and I took after Paul's thinking, hey, if I die, I go be with the Lord. If I live, I get to keep serving him.
Yeah.
Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything.
Well,
and the peace of Christ will guard you. So that was huge for me. And then there was a book I read. Now, I'm not saying everyone would be recommended to this book. It was a French Catholic monk who just talked a lot about conversational prayer. I always thought you had to get into a prayer closet and have this intense time, and I didn't realize that you could also just pray throughout your day and just spend time with God, whether I was waiting tables or in between a task. And that act
oh,
really
Jordan was a waiter.
Oh yeah, and I had a lot of time walking around.
Yeah.
I keep Bible verses in my waiter book. I had a before Christ and after Christ time as a waiter, and it was very different.
Yeah.
But I'd be cleaning under a table, going, "This would normally be so boring,"
Yeah.
or be thinking about stressful things, possibly. But no, you could spend time with God and let that kind of fall to the wayside. And then there's just certain Bible verses that have helped me over the years. Matthew 6:33, seek His kingdom first and His righteousness. He will take care of everything you need. It doesn't mean you don't work hard. It just means you focus on the bigger things and trust Him with the smaller things. Philippians 4, 6, and 7, I tell people all the time.
Don't forget 8.
Yes. Well, 8, the peace of Christ also.
Well, I like that you brought up.
What you think about, yes.
Yeah, I like that. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I like that he brought up Matthew 6 because that's the same verse that says, look at the birds. Are they not provided for? So why do I have to worry?
Don't worry about tomorrow.
Don't worry about tomorrow. And then look at the flowers because, they're flourishing and they're doing well and God provides. And if God's going to provide for those things, He's going to provide for us too. So what are we worried about? Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, we can be anxious about a test. We can be anxious about talking to a person. We can be anxious in social settings. But at the end of the day, if you're following the word, if you're living and loving like Jesus and you're trusting God, there's not a whole lot you can be anxious about. If anything, you're worried that you're not going to have the status that you want to have.
And I memorized.
Could I throw in something just haven't lived a day or two? And it's this. God's in charge of everything. And if He says I don't need to worry about stuff because He's got it, He's got it. And what I find in my life is that when I get anxious, it is not because God's not doing His job, it's because I've done something dumb.
Yeah. And that's not to say that that's for everyone, like that you're just anxious because you're doing something wrong. But actually maybe, because I also think that a lot of anxiety doesn't necessarily stem from I'm worried about my life. It's more I'm worried about not being in the position or having the status or, being in the right spot culturally that I want to be, if that makes sense.
Well, it makes sense, but is it sensible?
No, it's not. But that's where a lot of anxiety stems from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think
you want to be impressive.
I think another thing we've talked about before, Jesus is the one we follow. And if you look at His example, number one, when you're reading through Scripture, you got this first century time. And I'm not saying it wasn't hard and there wasn't hard work, but you see the schedule Jesus took and you watch how He starts in the morning with God. He gives His schedule over to God. And He says in John 5, I don't do anything on my plan. I do whatever He does. He wants me to do. And then you watch how He goes through His day, and He has all these things that come up that didn't look like it was His agenda. But He's open to God.
That's when you know you're on God's agenda.
And think of the famous Bible stories that happened because He was open to what looked like a plan being changed. Someone being led down a roof to you. Someone coming in front of you in front of a crowd. And He took each situation in a calmness and a focus on God and a purpose that helps us to kind of think, hey, if God is calling to do the same thing with us.
Yep.
And a lot about, you said earlier, is sovereignty. Mm-hmm. If you know God's in control, it doesn't mean you work less hard, but you trust Him for the things that He opens and closes and follow His plan.
Well, I've noticed a lot of the things that I'll be anxious about is my flesh fighting the spirit, and it's my flesh likes to be comfortable. Whereas God is always going to pull us out of our comfort zone, and where that can look like worry, it's not. It's us not giving over our own desires and our own comforts and our own,
Well, isn't that a
peace.
lack of faith?
Yes.
It's just not trusting God.
Yes.
And so, being as I can't trust God to handle it, I've got to handle it. Mm-hmm. Same question I asked Jordan a while ago. How's that working out for you?
It's a control issue for sure.
I think another
partly.
A big thing too is, and like you said, flesh takes over. So I know also when something happens and I want to respond quickly, it's usually my flesh, not the spirit. So you want to pause, take a break when able to, and let God direct you. But a big thing for me too is you've got logic and emotions, and I think anxiety is often driven by feelings and emotions, and feelings and emotions are very important, but so is logic and right thinking. And so we always talk about how our faith is based on fact, the fact of God's existence, the fact of Christ and his resurrection, and then it's our faith in that fact, and then it's our feelings. For me, when I am in a moment of anxiety or I see something with my kids, I remind them, okay, now hold on, let's turn off the feelings for a moment and let's look at this logically. You're crying right now for this, but is that helping the situation at all? Is it making it better or worse? Worse. Okay, then don't do it.
Yeah.
Choose not to do it. And sometimes I will let my logic side take over and say, okay, is this going to help me? Is this going to be better, or is there a better solution? Shut off the feelings for a moment as best I can and return when the feelings are needed. There's a time for
Well,
feelings, there's a time for logic, and I try to learn how to switch from one to another when I need to.
would y'all say that anxiety is a feeling, solely a feeling?
I think it stems from a feeling. I'm not sure there's not different kinds of anxiety.
I think so.
Sometimes I think with me, sometimes if I'm feeling anxious, it has something to do with my health.
Yeah, a lot of
Like my
times.
blood pressure's too high.
That's
And
Yeah.
so I will feel anxious because my blood, you like, and so you want to, of course, when your blood pressure's too high, you want to chill. So you lay down there for a minute in your recliner and you think,
And your
okay, I'm
mind
going to
starts
chill
going.
and see if I can't get my blood pressure down. And your heart's just kind of going
Yeah.
quivering.
but that's a great
A
point.
lot of mine will stem from, and I was telling him this earlier, but like a lot of mine will stem from overexhaustion. Also, I feel all of my emotions in my stomach, which is weird. So, like, even sometimes I'll be fine the whole day and then I'll eat a meal that didn't settle right. And then all of a sudden, my mind starts going wild because something wasn't right and something made me uncomfortable. And that feeling just spirals into a huge deal. And I know that's the enemy, but how do you combat that?
Well, that's a good point. We were kind of hinting that earlier. What you just said was, I've had a time that I'm coming out of, hopefully, where I've been very out of shape after COVID. And I remember our pastor in the church before, he did a whole series on stress, and he talked about the biblical aspects of it, Bible verses on it. But then he did a whole lesson, and it sounds unbiblical at first when he's talking. He just says, all right, you want to reduce some stress in your life? Let's try some things. Drink more water, eat healthy, get plenty of rest.
It's true.
On top, obviously on top of everything we talked about biblically.
Stop drinking so much coffee.
And so for me, just lately, this past 3, 4, 6 months or more, especially lately, I'm drinking lots of water, getting more rest, watching what I'm putting into my body.
And less caffeine, right?
I have no caffeine for
Yeah.
2 months.
I think caffeine is a contributor.
There are good moments.
Yeah, if you drink too much coffee, you'll get nervous. But
Makes you shaky.
we're
Good
trying
moments for
to
caffeine.
partake. So you've got to. I don't think you can. Like you said, is it emotional?
Yeah.
Well, it can be.
I think sometimes it's a spiritual
But we're
war.
body, soul, and spirit.
Yeah.
And so I think if I've got an anxiety issue going, I've got to check all
three,
three
yeah.
boxes. I can't just check one. It
We
may
have-
be because I'm having a physical problem. That's going to affect the other two.
We have evidence of that in culture. You can see some people that are really well in shape, athletes or certain celebrities, but they may not have a spiritual life with God and have eternal life and be right with Him. And so then you see the other issue, the other side of that hidden them, where stress and anxiety hits. Even though they may be in shape and eating well and having personal trainers. And
Well, I think, though, that being a part of it, like your physical, I think it all comes back to what I'm doing with the Lord is still going to be the center.
Mm-hmm.
My body is the temple of God.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't take care of it as though it's the temple of God, I'm going to pay the price. Sometimes
Absolutely.
that price is going to be paid through anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Well, He's also the Lord of my every part of my soul. The soul being the seat of the mind, will, and emotions. And so I don't know at which point of those things. Well, that's where my feelings are going to come in. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's emotional,
Yeah.
and so I think if it's emotional, though, I've got the caboose pulling the train, because if I believe a thing and think a thing, I will automatically feel the thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that even happens with men and their wives. You want to know how to love your wife better? Well, treat her with love, and the emotion will follow.
Yep, it's true.
And
Well, our culture, the challenge is that we started with was it's getting worse in our culture and with the younger generations.
oh, you had to bring that up, didn't
Yeah.
you?
So what are some things we can do about that? Well, like I said, I will I'll remember this from a Citizens Defending Freedom meeting that we had. They talked about the whole idea of big pharma and schools coming together and getting counselors in there with these kids from an early age and asking, how do you feel? What are you scared of? What's going on? Getting them to a point of nervousness so then they can prescribe them some things that their parents think they need and get on to some things early. And we've got a whole junk food market that, once again, ties back to you spend all the money on this stuff and feel horrible, and then later they try to sell you these medications to counteract that.
Well, I read this statistic this morning. Get this. I don't know how true this is, but I read it, and it said the average high school student today has the same anxiety levels of a psychiatric patient in the 1950s.
I agree with that.
Isn't that crazy?
But I think a lot of it, we've hit on a lot of it. It'd take us hours
Yeah.
to cover a topic like this, because every time you open another wormhole,
Yeah.
there's more stuff that pulls out of it. But ultimately, I think the starting point, the number one starting point, is, do I have a relationship with Jesus Christ?
Always.
That was the biggest.
That's always the
biggest
starting point.
game-changing thing for me.
And then how do you help somebody that isn't a Christian that's dealing with anxiety? Like I don't really have a solution for you,
Well,
to be
that's an
honest, because you have no
opportunity.
one to trust.
That's an opportunity right there. We have several things and resources biblically that we do talk. There's so many people out there that are struggling with this. And then, number one, they need to see a difference in our life. And I'll give you an example. When 9/11 hit, I'm an atheist still. I'm starting to go to a Bible study. And we go to eat that day in town here in Corpus. And my friends had a peace over their life that I did not have. I felt as if the whole floor had come out from under me and my perceived safety was gone, because if you're in that moment, you don't know if there's more attacks. You don't know what else is going to happen. That's just the beginning of something. And I said, I need what they have. And when COVID hit, it was the same kind of situation
Yeah.
for a lot of people, because there was a lot of fear mongering out there, even more. And one of the verses I leaned onto was at the end of Hebrews chapter 10, 12. Hebrews chapter 12, where it talks about we have inherited an unshakable kingdom, while the nations will shake. And when we have that kind of security with Christ, because of what he's done, and he holds us, and we have assurance of salvation, and we have this peace with him, other people will see that. If we're living that out, they're going to want to know what we have, and then we can now start to talk to them about what happens when you get a relationship with Christ and are no longer worried about judgment and death and eternity, and everyday things like your purpose and who you are and having someone in your life. Psalm 23 doesn't guarantee that we will not go through a dark valley or that we will be surrounded by enemies, but it says, I will be with you. I will shepherd and protect you. I'll serve you in their presence. And to know that we will still go through tough things, but we now have the one who created everything in us and promises a better, perfect future will change a lot right there.
And that's so true. And we got to wrap this up, because I'm going to get anxious because I got a lot to do. but if I were to just want to sit down one-on-one and talk to somebody right now and say, okay, well, number one, do you have a relationship with Jesus Christ? Because if not, you're dealing with a lot of eternal issues, and you're in a world where a world that's gone crazy. Number two, I would say once you've given your life to Christ, get in His Word and find out what He has to say. And then outside of it, okay, so now there's the spiritual realm, ask God how your day ought to go. And could I tell you this? if you're not getting through with everything that you thought you needed to do today, you've got some stuff on your calendar that God doesn't want on it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Can we add in with this part, memorizing a few key Bible verses like we talked about? Matthew 6:33, Philippians 4:6 and 7, Psalm 55:22.
Don't forget 8.
Yes.
Whatever's good.
Don't
Whatever.
forget
Psalm
What you think
55:22.
of?
Cast your cares on the Lord. Cast your burden on the Lord, and He will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be moved. Is Psalm 55:22. And one other one I really love, 1 Peter 5:7. He's talked about Satan roaring and prowling. He's talked about a lot of things. He says, cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you.
Yeah.
And whether it's a new person who's looking to come to faith or someone who's a believer, start to get them memorizing some scriptures that'll really help and focus on those when you need them.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to note, too, that Christians who are dealing with anxiety that seek help from other Christian counselors, and I can say this from a personal level, too, people can tell you what to do. Like, we can talk on this podcast and tell you what to do to help your anxiety. But at the end of the day, it has to be your decision to trust the Lord, and you have to figure that out because nobody else can help you do that. That is
Exactly.
all a journey on your own with the Lord. Nobody else can do it for you. So if you're looking for a solution from other people or other things, it's not going to work. It might be temporary, but it's not going to be forever.
And I do think we need to add that becoming a Christian is not the whole deal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. Charles Haddon Spurgeon, who was a Prince of Gospel Preachers, dealt with anxiety and depression all of his life. There are other elements. God made us tripartite. So I think you need to get that relationship with God going. But you've got a physical body, and you're living in that physical body. You need to get out and get some exercise. You need to move. You need to get off social media all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And guide,
Huh?
also guide your focus. Because if you're focused on God and you're focused on whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is
Philippians 4:8.
Right.
yes,
Verse
Philippians
8.
4:8.
Yep, yep.
Don't forget 8. Focus
Yeah.
on those things. Think about those things and put your mind on the right track. Also, when you're feeling anxious about all the things you have to do, like you were talking about, I would say, I'm only 20, so, I'm not super wise, but I've noticed what helps me is take everything one moment at a time and stop thinking about all the responsibilities you have to do after. Because if you're present in that area you're in right now and you don't think about everything else, it's going to help.
Yeah, and you're not going to stroke out if you're waiting at a red light.
No.
You know, people do. They go crazy. You're sitting there at the red light, and you don't get your foot on the accelerator quick enough, and they're flipping you off. And
Practice peace. Honestly, practice peace. And if it's unnecessary to be upset or anxious or stressed, stop feeling like that.
Well, my mom said something too when I was a kid or a teenager that really hit me. I think there's a lot of times when kids will want to hide situations from the parents, or they're always just exaggerating everything with hormones and emotions. My mom always said, just remember, if you ever get in trouble with something, say, what's the worst that could happen?
Yes.
Do you have a place you can go back to? So something big happens, take a bigger focus for a moment and say, okay, if we had to downsize, if I had to lose this job and we had to do this, like, think a little bigger beyond that so we don't make any sudden drastic decisions on things without looking at the bigger picture of it. And especially in light of Christ. Once again, if we live with Christ, to die is gain. Either way, we're going to be okay with Him.
Yeah.
But that little piece of advice always helped me to really think through and go, okay, now hold on, is this the worst thing? If you take the time to develop a good set of friends and family, we've talked about the spiritual up and down with Christ. And there's also the lateral, the love God and love others. If we're developing good relationships with family and friends, and that's physical family and friends, and also our spiritual family and friends, and you have a good relationship with a church, and a small group, and a Sunday school class, and a ministry, you've got extra resources to depend on to help you. And once again, I've told people, if you get on the side of depression, go help somebody else. Mm-hmm. And you're not focused on your stress or your situation. And you're
That's what I'm
helping
saying.
someone else.
Direct your focus. It's not about you, and it's not about all the things you have to do. Be present and think about everybody else and how they may
we
feel
need other
too.
people to help us when we're stress to share about that and help, that we have friends and family for, and the church specifically for, and a small group for.
So,
And give you the day to the Lord every morning.
yes.
And if He takes some stuff out of it, that's okay.
Yep.
If He puts some stuff in it, that's okay. Because now I'm not on my schedule, I'm on His schedule.
Every day I wake
His
up
is
and I
always
say,
best.
God, my day is yours. I'm yours and my day is yours.
And He will mess it up.
And if we
Yes.
need examples of how to do that, once again, go into Scripture, look at the life of Jesus, look at the life of His followers as they're learning how to put their agenda and their timetable to Him and trust in His sovereignty and focus on His purposes, like Matthew 6:33.
And if you'll notice, their culture allowed a little bit more. And so think, am I too worried about what's going on in my culture and where I should be culturally? Or am I seriously worried about my faith?
Right.
And that helps.
So, if you're listening, hit the like button.
And subscribe.
Leave a comment.
Don't be
And
afraid to.
subscribe. All those things are really important because we'd really like to,
And hit the bell.
as we learn more how to do this and make it more interesting, we'd really like for
Uh-huh.
our audience to grow.
And share
Yeah,
it with
we
You
wanna
somebody
can help
know.
else.
us. You can help us do that.
Yeah,
Yep.
share it with somebody else that you know that may be dealing with some of these things, and maybe there'll be
And
something that'll help.
sometimes it's hard to have a conversation with your own friends, and even with my friends, that one of the easiest things I've noticed I can do is just send them a podcast I listen to, something that they're dealing with, because you don't have to have a direct, awkward conversation with them.
Tell them to take a walk, take some time in their car, and listen.
So, Dad, I have one last controversial question to wrap this up.
Uh-oh.
Is it a sin to worry?
Well, now Jesus said, be anxious for nothing.
Yep,
Isn't that right?
that's right.
Well, actually, Paul said that. Be anxious for nothing, but everything by prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known to God. Jesus, over in Matthew,
Don't worry.
He said, don't worry about your life.
That's all right.
But sometimes you can't control whenever you get worried.
Well, you can't. You know, I don't want to condemn anybody because they're worrying, okay?
Yeah.
Man, I don't want to condemn anybody about anything. That's
But-
not my job. My job's to love people.
And we've all been
Maybe
there.
you don't act on your worries.
So when I'm dealing with people, I really don't want anybody to think I'm judging you for where you are. What
No.
I'm trying to do is help you out of a bad situation where maybe you're messing up your life. I've had a lot of people along the way help me, and I love people. That's just God just put that in me. I just love people.
Yep.
And I love them no matter what they look like or who they are or what they're doing. I just love people.
We're not always responsible for things that hit us or come at us. And what we encourage people with is, what do we do with it?
Yeah,
And
don't act on
like
it.
I said, sometimes it overtakes us quick. There's things that happen, but once again, you run through the gamut of the options here, and you.
Be proactive, don't be reactive.
Mm-hmm.
But no, you're not always in sin because I
You're
never did
right.
answer the question. You're
Yeah.
not always in sin because you have some anxiety.
Okay.
I thought of last thing too. We talked about Jesus' parable in Matthew 7, the solid ground and the shifting sand. Well, we've talked about relationship with Christ. When you have the times where things are going well, use those times not to sit back and be lazy. Use those times to fortify those things in your life. Once again, staying close in your relationship with God, not waiting till it goes bad.
Mm-hmm.
While it's good, spend time on your health and what you're eating, not just when you think you're in shape, all the time. And then once again, spend time now with building relationships, making them healthy, depending on others, having others depend on you, being in the church. Don't wait for something bad to happen. And then it's like trying to board up your house in the middle of a hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
You get things prepared because something is going to hit every one of us, big or small. But what are we doing before it comes up?
Yeah.
Not then the sudden death of a loved one. I mean, prepare.
Practice
for things
trusting the
before.
Lord.
Talk to the Lord about those things before they ever happen.
Yeah.
That might help a little bit.
Yeah. Don't just turn to God in the hard times too, because then he's kind of a stranger.
Yeah. I mean, it's never too late, but once again, there's some things we can do when the weather's good and we're feeling good that are a little harder when you're sick or you're hurting or you're in trouble.
Yep.
Yeah,
Use the time well.
I agree with all that. We can't. I wish we can't exhaust this
Yeah.
topic.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
Well, we appreciate y'all listening in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment so we can know what we can do better and what y'all like. And hit the bell so you don't miss a video from us. We'll see y'all next time. Make sure to go out to love God and love others. Bye.
Don't forget, if you leave a comment, make it a nice one.
Or we'll get anxiety.
Constructive.